All right. Welcome, everybody, to the first session of the Ohio Fly Tying Guild. I'm Gary Begley, and as Fly Tying Director for the Ohio Council of Fly Fishers International, I wanted to put together an event that would bring fly tyers together. We all have a common interest. We can learn from each other. We can share fly techniques, fly tying techniques. We can share fly patterns, fishing techniques, fishing rigs. What line leader tippet do you use for a particular fly that we're talking about? Now, and by the way, the name Ohio Fly Tying Guild, that I'm not excluding anyone outside of Ohio. It's going to be open to the public, not just Ohioans. Now, what I have planned for these monthly sessions is I'll choose one or two tying techniques to describe and demonstrate. There'll be some, especially at first, there'll be some thread work involved, and then others probably as we go along, it'll be basically various materials, how to select and prepare certain materials for the hook. And as I say, I'll do any demonstrations that are necessary. And then I'll have one or two fly patterns planned that will utilize those techniques. And while I don't have a featured tire planned tonight, I plan on having a tire with someone besides me come in and tie a fly afterward. I don't want to be the only one tying flies. You guys can tie flies. I'd really rather have someone else come in afterward and just simply tie a fly for us. Your favorite pattern for whatever species. Doesn't have to be anything special. I do have 3 volunteers at this particular time, so we'll see how that goes. Now, what I have planned for this session is some thread control and tying with pheasant tail. Now, pheasant tail is not going to be that difficult of a material to work with or to explain how to work. So I'm going to be concentrating on thread control. I really believe there's a lot of fly tyers aren't aware of some of the very simple little subtle things we can do with our thread to make our job much easier as far as tying flies. Some circumstances, a little bit of thread control, we can tie a more durable fly. And I'm not talking about taking 16 wraps instead of 2. There's other cases where, depending on the materials that are used, we can manipulate our thread to the point to where we'll have a much better looking fly, much better body material or body section. So, does anyone have any questions at this point? Any questions or comments for that matter? All right.
Yeah, I have one, Gary. About the
Go ahead.
recordings. About the recordings, are they going to be made available to anyone?
Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
goal. That's
Okay.
my goal. Yes. Frankly, what I'll probably do at this point in time, I think I'll start a YouTube channel and get them on there.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else? Questions, comments at all? Anytime throughout the evening, anytime anyone has a question, just shout it out. I've been on Zoom calls and people like to use the chat from time to time. Especially once I go to the Vice, I won't be seeing the chat. I'll be looking at the Vice, and I won't notice it. So just go ahead and shout it out. All right. That said, I'm going to get started with thread control, and I'll ask all of you to follow me over to the Vice. So I've got a hook. I got a hook in the Vice. Obviously, my camera is at a very different angle than I normally have it when I'm demonstrating tying. So I want you all to be able to see the bobbin when it's hanging down there. Now, I got 5 different things on thread control. First is thread tension. I think we all pretty much have that down pat, but I have a twist for you. Just starting the thread. Just 2 or 3 turns is all you need to start the thread properly with proper thread tension. If I'm making loose wraps, it's not going to hang there like that. And I've got to the point where I wrap from underneath. It accomplishes basically the same thing. Now, I'm using thread tension, tight tension all the way around the hook. Now, we don't always have to do that. I'll show you an exception at the end of this that can be really helpful. So the other next thing I want to show is, and you guys probably all are aware of this, a touching turn thread base. This is the tag end, and the end is coming out of the bobbin. I'm going to refer to as the working thread. So it just goes against, actually tying against the tag end, and it slides right down. Now, once you've done this a while, you don't need to rely on the tag. You can tie a touch and turn thread base without relying on it. And if you go too far, not a problem, just scoot it back over. Now, I'm going to stop my thread at the hook barb. That's generally most straight shank hooks. That is the point where the straight shank ends and the bend starts. I use that as a landmark for a lot of flies. That and the hook point, halfway point of the hook shank, third of the way back of the hook shank, and hook eye width behind. I use those all as landmarks. That helps me get consistency with my fly patterns. If I tie 10 or 12 patterns or 10 or 12 flies of a particular pattern, I like them all to look the same. So utilizing those landmarks along the hook will help me accomplish that. Now, once you look at my bobbin, it's spinning. It's spinning counterclockwise. Why is it spinning? Because every time I took a wrap with my thread, I put a clockwise twist in the thread. So it's simply undoing the wraps that I put in. Now, can we use is there an advantage? I'll say it this way. Is there an advantage to a twisted or corded, sometimes it's called, thread? And I'll say yes. If the thread is twisted, it's going to be stronger and it'll bite into materials better. That's where I come up with the idea we can probably tie a more durable fly. Now, does it matter if it's twisted counterclockwise or clockwise? If you're just wanting to twist the thread to cord it, use it as a corded thread, it doesn't make any difference. But we can utilize a twisted thread to our advantage. I'm going to hold up an invisible tail material with thread twisted just slightly, counterclockwise. Thread jumps right up on my thumb. I'm just pulling up bobbin tube straight up. Thread goes back there. Yep. Perfect spot for a pinch wrap. Or sometimes it's a solid. I can put my thumbnail there to pinch it down, and the thread can run right off my thumbnail in order to bind the material down. Flat, not twisted either direction. Like that. You might be able to see the light glaring off of it. Anyway, it's flat, kind of like a thin piece of floss or a miniature ribbon, if you will. If we're going to tie a fly that utilizes a bias for abdomen material, a goose or turkey bias or a quill body, we need a nice, smooth, flat thread base. That's how we can accomplish that with a flat thread. Some flies have a floss section for the body. That a flat thread would work great for that. And we can flatten out the thread. That's going to make it easier to split the thread for a split thread dubbing loop, which I'll cover all four of those things I just mentioned in later sessions. Now that brings us to thread torque. Thread torque is kind of frustrating. It can be a problem. Let me show you. I've got a piece of a little bit of Hackle barbs here, and I'll tie it on top of the hook. And watch what happens if I'm not compensating for thread torque. The thread wants to take the material all the way around the hook like that, as opposed to being able to keep it up on top. That's thread torque. Now, in order to start this, we know thread torque is going to want to take it over top of the hook shank. I'm going to spin the thread just a bit to the rear. I'm going to hold this at a 45-degree angle and come up, make a soft wrap, and I'm going to let thread torque bring it up on top. Now, we need to bind it down all the way across the hook shank. I'm sure all of you, like me, has taken in a situation like this, you take 2 or 3 reps, bring the material back up. Take 2 or 3 reps, bring the material back up. Well, there's a way around that. My thread is spreading. Get rid of some of this stuff. Spin that just a little bit. See if I can tighten my thread back up. Yeah. Okay. Now, if you adjust your thread tension, you're able to keep it on top of the hook shank, as opposed to that. The thread torque comes right back into play. What I'm doing to achieve that is this is a soft wrap around here, soft on top, soft on the neck, on the back side, soft underneath, and I pull tension here. Soft, soft, soft tension, 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 tension. And that way you're able to avoid thread torque in that fashion. All right. Any other comment or questions?
Well, I see that you spin it the same direction I do, so
Oh.
when it hangs down and unwinds, I spin it back to the right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's something else too. Let me go back to the vice for a sec. Sometimes there is some confusion. People say counterclockwise and clockwise, and people say left and right. And sometimes people get confused. I like to speak to it as though you're looking straight down at the hook shank. So this would be clockwise. Bobbin would be spinning clockwise there. Go slower, like so. And of course, the opposite would be counterclockwise.
Well, I guess I spin it counterclockwise then.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I think it's a matter of people's minds working a little bit different frame of mind sometimes. But I think of it as though you're looking straight down at the hook shank. And then, of course, that would make spinning it, if you spin it that way, toward the rear of the hook, that would be counterclockwise. And if you spin it toward the hook eye, that would be clockwise. We on the same page with that?
Yeah, well, I just see it from the thimble's point of view, looking up.
Okay, right.
So, like I said, we're both going the same direction, but you see it as counterclockwise, and I see it
Exactly.
differently.
Yep. I see a great deal of tires that think of it as though it's going straight down. And then I see some really good tires, and they speak to it like you do. And I think, well, no, that's backwards. So we're
Well,
accomplishing this. We're accomplishing the same thing.
the thing is, when it's parked and you just let go of it, it automatically goes unwinds,
Right.
and
It'll
whatever
unwind
direction
the
it's
clockwise.
unwinding, then I spin it back the other direction to tighten it back up again.
Yeah. Yep. All right. I will. Let's see. Show you a picture of the. So as far as the materials, this is standard nymph hook. When I tie a bead head, I go to a 2x long or a 3x long hook. So this is a 2x long hook. It's a TMC 5262, I believe. And tail fibers are pheasant tail. Body's pheasant tail. I got some copper wire, brassy size. There's a wing case there. You can barely tell it. It is pheasant tail as well. And I like to use most of the time when tires tie a pheasant tail nymph, they'll use pheasant tail for the legs. I like to use Hungarian partridge fibers. I think there's a little bit more movement involved with them. And that band right there, this one I didn't use red. I'm going to use red when I tie this right now in a minute or two. But there's that band of material, band of color I put there for a hotspot, so to speak. That's the thread, purely. And if you notice, I just use red thread for the whole fly. If you notice, you can't see the thread anywhere else except for right there behind the bead. So I will get started on that one. Actually, I'll show you the pheasant tail. Like I mentioned before, really not that much to talk about as far as pheasant tail. You can buy the whole clump, tail clump. It's referred to as, and you usually get two big center feathers that are just absolutely loaded with material that we need to use to tie a fly of this sort. Now, I like to use the outer ones. They do have some decent fibers, usually only one half of it. But I like to use these, the shorter ones that aren't quite long enough for wrapping on a very big hook. I use those for the tailing material. So I'm going to put that over here right now. And we'll go to the vise. I've already got some weight and a bead on the hook. It's a size 14, so a 1/8 inch diameter copper bead, and I put 10 wraps of lead wire, 20 thousandths. I actually put that right up inside the bead. That helps center the bead. And let's see, like I mentioned, I'm going to use red thread. And get the thread started back here behind the lead. Should zoom in a little bit. Back to the barb. Can't see the barb, but I can tell where it would be. I'm going to go ahead and tie my tail material in before I tie the rib. I'm just going to get about 6 or so of these, 6 or 8 pheasant tail fibers. Pheasant tail barbs, I should refer to them as. And I want the tail half to 2/3 the length of the hook shank. I like them a little bit longer. The thread torque, take it up on top. Shorten it up just a little. And keep it on top by adjusting my thread tension on the thread that's going on to the hook, not my thread tension on the bobbin. And I'll tie in a little piece of copper wire for the rib. Whatever your personal preference is, I like to tie wire ribs in underneath the hook shank, let them come up to the far side. That way, when I start wrapping, it doesn't mess with my tail. So next, we need to tie in some more pheasants. I'll wrap it for the abdomen section. I got this one. You see, I've used a few off of this. I'm going to get about 4 or 5. I'm in by the tail or by the tip, pardon me. Thread on up out of the way. Start wrapping the abdomen section. Whoops. Would you believe me if I said that was the only time that's ever happened to me?
7 o'clock.
Yeah, just gonna say, yeah, the hackle pliers it might save that.
Yeah, I like to live a little dangerously. It will get to the point where I'll put some hackle pliers on. Like about right now is probably a real good time. You might think I'm a little bit late putting hackle pliers on, but this I did here. We'll go with it. Get rid of the get rid of our extra. Need to wrap the rib. And I'm going to counter wrap it, perhaps to add a little bit of durability to the abdomen section. And tuck one underneath. It's going to become the thorax area. This up tight. Helicopter that off. I need to come back. Not to the third. I like to stay a little bit shy of the third with when I start my wing case because we got the bead. And I try to keep it looking proportional even with the bead. I'm going to get a few fibers off of my pheasant tail for wing case. It's going to be a little wider than the body part. I'm probably getting 10 fibers. I'll tie this in. Wing case. I'm going to or trim those off. Make sure that's going to look like a wing case when we get finished. That's going to suffice. Go back any further than that. All right, so we need to tie in some peacock coral. I got 3 peacock coral. I like to tie this in by the tips. But I generally cut off about an inch, inch and a half, perhaps, because the very tips are quite fragile. Get rid of the excess. Now, I could just pull this wing case over, bind it down, and say we got a good bead head nymph, which we would have, but I like to put legs, simulate legs on them when possible. I've got one prepared. I'll show you how I do this. Show you how I prepared this. Throw all this back. Really no point in getting rid of it. Once you get back this far in the on the bird, the feathers, they have a little brown line there that shows me the center. These little small hackle pliers. Grab it right there. I'm going to bring these fibers back to the point to where they're going to be the length that I want them. All right. And carefully trim this section off. And I can just pull out what I think is going to look like a set of legs. That's going to be pretty decent. I'll just use this one. I had one here prepared in case I had an issue, but we'll just use this one. A little bit of a spin. There's a set of legs on each side. And like I mentioned, most tires use some more pheasant, but I like to use these for more movement. Gather all this wing case material together. Bring it forward, put it down. Make sure I'm fairly in the center. Some of these at a time. Usually end up getting a cleaner cut if you do one or two or a few fibers at a time, as opposed to trying to take the whole clump. And it's a hot spot. Half hitch. Finish. And there's a bead head. Pheasant tail with some partridge legs. Have one other fly plan. Go ahead and switch back. This other spot, there's a dry version, a dry variant. This it's got some hackle fibers for the tail. It's dry fly hook, standard dry fly hook. Got some pheasant tail for the body, silver wire for a rib, and some dry fly hackle for the hackle. And I'll switch threads. This is a rust color thread using 8/0. And I'm going to start out of behind the hook eye. Thread base. That's something I forgot to mention before as far as running a smooth touching turn thread base. We don't always have to have a touching turn thread base. And I'll be tying flies as we go along that I'll show you that we don't. All right, that's some hackle fibers here for the tail. Want about the length of the hook. A bit of a spin. Pinch wrap. And start to bring it up on top. Now I need a piece of silver wire. that down, so just like we did on the previous fly. Now I'm gonna get four, four pheasant fibers. And these in again by the tail or by the tip. Just in my thread tension in order to keep material on top of the hook shank. Right. Try to keep these flat. Thread forward a little bit. Okay, I'll put the hackle pliers on. Get rid of the extra. Now the wrap again. I'll start my hackle about right there. Wasn't necessarily wanting to get into dry fly techniques, but since we're here, show you how I like to tie on dry fly hackle. So this is the shiny side. There's the dull side. I like the dull side facing rearward. Most every tire you see ties the hackle in, not only parallel with the hook shank, but right on top of it. Well, first thing we do, if we tie it on like that, we grab it and pull it up 90 degrees. So I say, why don't we just tie it on 90 degrees to begin with? And in order to avoid some of the barbs shooting straight rearward, I want them all to wrap pretty close to 90 degrees. I prepared this. If I need to zoom in just a bit more. Taking some of the barbs off of both sides of the rake is some further on this side than this side. That's because that's the side that's going to meet the hook first. I'm going to cord up my thread. Wrap there. Come in between the racus and the hook shank, and then we'll come across that way. Now, essentially, what I've done is crisscrossed the hackle, and it tightens it down pretty well. I can see right now the material is going to be extending out past the hook eye, so I'm going to cut this off a little and continue binding that down for extra security. And that's the hackle. Start there we go, that'll work. different angle. Push everything back. There's sometimes two or three just don't want to cooperate. Sometimes I can get them with the tweezers. Sometimes it requires scissors. It's all right. I've got both. Hold up just a little bit of a head. I don't want a real large one. And whip finished. Well, so I open my scissors a little, pull the hackle taut, and push it in there. That way I won't cut off all the little barbs.
Just-
All right. So thanks to all of you for showing up. I'm going to shut off the recording.